knew was that I was tasting things. And when you have a sense that works, you remember. Because what you're tasting is so clear that it goes into your memory bank. And it's filed away somewhere, and you can reproduce it. You can, like today, I can go into a grocery store and I can say, shall I have green beans today? But how do I want to cook them? Do I want a little ginger and garlic and a little mustard seed? And I can taste that combination. And I said, I don't know about that. Maybe I will have it with a little red chili and turmeric. And so I just taste as I go and decide what I'm going to cook. And this taste memory is given to people who have a palate. And because we can recreate, we can go back and remember exactly how something tastes, like a musician can do, or anybody with a visual person who has a very good, keen sense of visual sense, can remember colors and can remember shades of different colors. In reds, you just don't say red, there are 100 shades in red, and you can remember each of the different shades. So I think that palette was recording things and remembering things. So with my mother's 3-line recipes, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, I could then say when I cooked it, not right. It needs a little bit more of this, it needs a little bit more of that. I could adjust it to what I remember the taste to be. So that's how I started. I was living with a lovely, lovely young Jewish couple. Those were my digs. Where students stayed. You had your one room, and it was freezing in there, and I used to sit as close to the little gas fire that they had in the room, and I would dream of these things, and then my landlord said, you can use the kitchen. So I would go into the kitchen, and I would cook a little, some of these things that my mother had given me. And then I went from there. Then I sent for more recipes. I got bolder, and I would ask not just my mother, but cousins and aunts to send their recipes, and that's how the repertoire grew. So by the time I came to America, looking for acting work, I wanted to be Marlon Brando. This was my dream, that I would be like Marlon Brando. I would find acting work, and I would be as good an actor or actress as he was. That was what I dreamed about. But there was no work for Indians, and the thing is that I didn't just want to play Indians, but that's all I was offered. And those parts came once in 3 years. So what do you do in the meantime? So I needed desperately to work and make some kind of living. So I started writing. And I studied English in college. That was my subject. So I knew how to write. I could put words together. I could string words together. So I approached magazines and said, what can I write on for you? And the very first article I did was, they said, would you like to write about what you ate as a child in India? And I said, sure. And I wrote about that, and somehow that then had a life of its own. And I went on from there, and somebody came to me and said, would you like to do a cookbook? And also at the same time, Ismail Merchant, who had the ability, I'm sorry, he's not alive anymore, but he had the ability to sell anything. He could sell his little finger, he could sell his grandmother. He just had that kind of salesman's ability to sell anything. So somewhere he must have gone to the main food writer of the New York Times, called Craig Claiborne, and said to him, I have this wonderful actress, and she's a very good cook, and you must come and interview her. So Craig Claiborne actually asked me to come for an interview. And it was a very strange situation, because I was living with Sanford at that time, as it were. Mm-hmm. And I did not want him to come to this particular setup. So I went to an Irish friend of mine, and they were a couple, and I said, you have a lovely little apartment not very far from mine, where I am, and may I say this apartment is mine and have Craig Claiborne come there. So it was arranged, and I went 2 blocks or 1.5 blocks to their house, and I was waiting. Craig Claiborne came, and he looked around in the kitchen. He was looking at the cookbooks. And he said, "Oh, you like that book?" And I said, "Yes." I didn't even know what it was. You know? But so we talked, and I thought he might ask me to prepare something or not prepare something. But he said, "You know what? I'd like you to really cook something for me, but I'll come back next week." So then I had to go through the same rigmarole all over again, borrow the same apartment all over again, and then cook for Craig Claiborne. And then, so he wrote actually a huge 1-page piece, started everything off, and I was approached at that time by all kinds of publishers and said, "Would you like to do a cookbook? Would you like to write an Indian recipes?" And I said, "Sure, sure." So one publisher didn't work out, then another didn't work out. But finally I ended up, for some strange reason, with the best editor in the world at Kickoff, who was a sort of a genius at cookbooks, who'd done Julia Child and who was going to do Marcella Hazan later. She had all the best authors eventually. So somehow I landed with her, and she bought the book overnight, and therein lies a tale. You know, she helped me a lot. She was very receptive to what I'd written, and then encouraged me to write in my own way. She wasn't interested in changing me into just a food writer. She wanted me to stay the way I was, write the way I was, but write more efficiently for a cookbook. And I learned a lot from that experience, and I suppose I've gone on from there.
You know, I read Mango Tree that you had written, and one didn't need to know who had written it, because if you know Madhur, you can read that book and I could hear you.
The full title is Climbing the Mango Tree.
Climbing the Mango Tree. That's a biographical book that also has recipes and photographs. It's a memoir. But I thought that was delightful because you immediately, you could hear your voice in that. And I think the way you write your cookbooks is pretty much like that. That's from what you said. It's how you feel and what you say. Now, this book, Vegetarian India, is, you have checked also vegetarian cuisines around the world internationally. Which one do you think that speaks to you the most? The Indian vegetarian because you like Indian food, or is it, vegetarian cuisines around? And if you can talk about, people always think vegetarian food is healthy, the medicinal qualities. I myself is a carnivore, so this is bad news for me. But in any case, it's quite fascinating because at one stage when one came to America, being a vegetarian was a bloody nuisance because you couldn't get any food, nobody knew what to do with you, even pizza had something garlic, something that some Jane wouldn't eat, or, there was all these things. Whereas today, it's popular and people think it's the thing to do. So can you speak to that? I mean, when you wrote this book, was it because you had specific recipes or the preparations, or did you just like that food?
The reason for doing it, I had done international vegetarian food, a book on that. I had done a book on Asian vegetarian food, and I was sort of going backwards and inwards to what I'd never done, was an all-Indian book. And for me, my books have always been an exploration for myself as well. I wanted to travel through India and try and understand the vegetarian food of India, go to places where I had not been and try and understand it. And there was another thing that I wanted to write about, which I felt nobody had written about. It's not just food, it's how do people in different groups in India eat, and why do they eat what they eat. For example, this whole idea of the thali. The thali obviously began because of this whole Hindu concept of purity. So the cook is probably a Brahmin, or he's not. Anyway, he's bathed and he pours, or it's the mother in the house or the grandmother in the house, and their hand is clean, and they pour the food or serve the food in the thali, in all the little katoris, the little bowls. This is one platter, and it goes directly in front of the person who's going to eat. So no other hands touch it. And it's this whole idea of cleanliness, which is a very important part of India. So this eating on the banana leaf, where everything is served, and not many hands are there, and not too many dishes, just what's in front of you. And I remember growing up at home with this whole idea of jhuta. What is somebody else has touched, you cannot eat. And jhuta was a big thing, and I think most Americans will hardly believe this, but in most Indian families, and certainly mine, if my sister had taken a bite of an apple, I could not take a bite of the same apple. Her saliva was around there, and it was not clean. So I could not have a bite of the same apple. It was jhuta. That is the word we use, is jhuta. And I had great trouble when I came to this country. Well, people would say, oh, nice drink. Tell me what's in it. Do you like a sip of it? And I would just freeze for the first few seconds because I didn't know how to deal with this. And then I would take a sip, but it was like falling on my sword. I mean, it wasn't natural for me to have something that somebody else had tasted. And I think we grow up with certain concepts in India which makes our food, the serving of our food, the culture of our food, particular to us. It's different from the rest of the world. So I wanted to explore some of these ideas. And I thought what fun it would be to take, say, a very rich jeweler who has an office in the Taj Mahal Hotel in Bombay, and just follow him. Say, can I come to your house and have lunch with you and see what he has for lunch? How does he sit around with his family? How does he eat? So I did that. I did that with at least 2 jewelers because they were such fun and their jewelry was so good to look at. So I was so tempted by the jewelry. Then I said to another jeweler, can I do that with you too? So each one was very different and very interesting. Now one, his background was from Banaras. So he took me to his house, and this is Gazdar, one of the big jewelers in the Taj Hotel. And when he went home, his whole family was there. There was a cook in the house, but mostly the women had cooked. And he would sit down to this vegetarian meal, which had dal and vegetables and khanvi and, you know, various Gujarati things, all mixed up because this is Bombay, but all vegetarian. And first he would eat the same things with rice, and then they would be eaten with a bread, a chapati. And after everyone had eaten, he would go back to the office, but while he was gone, his father was there at the office. And then he went back to the other place, back to the office, and the father would come and then have his meal. But they ate, this was their big meal of the day, and he said that when he got up in the morning, he had a glass of water with either, you know, something, neem leaves or hara dhania, coriander leaves, cilantro leaves in it, and to cleanse his stomach. So I was interested in the routines these people followed in their daily lives to keep themselves healthy, and everyone seemed to be aware that health was a very important part of this. So then the other jeweler, they were Punjabis from Delhi, and they had a shop called, they just named it Del apostrophe Art. And why? It made no sense, but it was Del Art. Sounded exotic and French. So anyway, there were 4 brothers, and they all had this one shop, and food would come from the house. The women of the house would cook all the food, put it in a big tiffin carrier, and all the brothers who had their shops nearby or helped in the same shop would gather. And you know where jewelry is displayed? That display case, the top of it, there's always a mirror so you can try your earrings on and whatever. That place was cleared, a tablecloth was put on it, there was already a bank banquette on one side and chairs on the other. And the four brothers then sat down and ate, and everything was put out for them. It was all vegetarian. And they actually made use of soya granules, and they said this is vegetarian keema. So I was very interested. What is vegetarian keema, which is mince meat? And so they were eating that as well, along with dals and vegetables. And so I thought it was so fascinating, and I wanted to record not just these very rich people, but I remember when we were in Andhra, I went into the fields, and where there were women were picking chilies. I was very interested in the whole business of picking chilies, which was quite an adventure for us, because we were there with a camera person, and a whole group of us were there. And the minute we entered the chili market, we all started sneezing and coughing, and we took out our tissues, and soon the tissues were in smithereens, falling away, because we couldn't stop. But everybody was sneezing and coughing, and the chili auction was going on as we all sneezed and coughed our way through it. So then we went to the place where they were picking chilies, and there were these women who were there, and one of them had a little lunch box. So I said, now what's in her lunch box? She's not rich, she has nothing. What is she going to be eating? And I'm always interested in how the palate in a particular area forms. What do people like to eat? What do they eat as children? What do mothers give them? Because I remember being in Japan and following some kids who then ended up by going to a movie, and I watched them buy what they were going to eat as a snack in the movie house, and they bought dried shrimp, which they were going to chew like chewing gum. So now their palate is being formed with something that they're going to have for the rest of their lives. So what were these Indian children in this particular part of Andhra going to eat? What were their mothers going to give them? What were the mothers eating themselves? So inside the little lunch box was rice, of course, and a kind of salsa made with tomatoes, red chilies, and garlic. And then you think of the Italian, the very simple meal of the Italian peasant, which is just pasta with olive oil and chilies and garlic. Not very different. No. And so the poor have, in a way, worked out the main thing is the starch, which fills them up, and there's a little bit of something to flavor the starch. And whether it's a sauce or it's true any country you go to, you'll find very much the same idea. And India was no different. So it's these kind of things that I found absolutely fascinating. And there are communities that are known for eating millet and how they use millet in their various dishes. Communities known for using more sesame seeds. So you go from house to house, and I decided that the best thing I was going to do was going to travel by car. Because when you see something wonderful, like I fell in love in Andhra with the pesarattu, which is like a dosa. It's a pancake made out of mung beans. Whole mung beans are soaked, they are ground, and then they're made into a very healthy pancake. So, and people make it slightly differently. The batter is thinner, thicker, they put egg on it, they can put all kinds of upma, which is semolina, cooked semolina, flavored semolina on it in between, and then roll it up. So there are all kinds of variations that you can do with a pesarattu. And every time we were going along in the car, I'd see a pesarattu stand and say, "Stop the car, we're getting out." So you jump out and look again, and sort of Sanford would take photographs, and we would try and get the newer version of the same dish and see what the variations were. So that was the most exciting part of this particular book, was going into homes and seeing. And one of the other things I remember, I went into several Muslim homes, and obviously what I was looking for was their vegetarian dishes, is to see the similarity in Hyderabad, for example, between the typical Hindu food, which is like a sambar, which is a dal with vegetables in it, and they have khatti dal, which is exactly, it's almost the same thing, and which is sour dal. And they live in the same area, but Muslim food and Hindu food have different names. They go in slightly different directions. But basically, particularly in Hyderabad, they are very, very similar. And it's those kind of things, cultural differences, interest me a lot. And I felt somewhere they should be recorded. Somewhere all of us should know more about these little differences that we have between us who are from different backgrounds in the same area. And then another great discovery for me is that nobody knows India fully. And if you say, I know Indian food, you're lying, because nobody can know. There's so much, so many little areas. And I remember going to Coorg, because I had already seen this wonderful lady who writes about food. Radhika Ponappa is her name. And she had made for me a kind of, you would call it a curry. I suppose it was a dish with a sauce, and it was with mushrooms. And she said what happens in Coorg is that for 4 months, nobody can get any food except if they hunt and gather, because the rains are so terrible in the monsoon season that you can't, nothing is growing really. So you go into the forest where there are all these ferns and bamboo shoots. And she said, she told me, and of course I discovered this then because I went, of course, to Coorg to find out more, that in Coorg, bamboo shoots, bamboos, come out for 60 years and then they die. So then there's a year of no bamboos and no bamboo shoots, and then they wait for the whole thing to regenerate. And that there are mushrooms, they are the size of dinner plates, and some are tiny, they look like little flowers on the ground, some go on barks, and they have all kinds of recipes for them, which you see some in the book, that you can't even imagine. So, for example, the big mushroom that's like a plate, they grill over wood, then they put salt, lime juice, and crushed green chilies. Can you imagine? My mouth is already. And they cut it up into pieces and they serve it with drinks. And everybody, including the men who are drinking their whiskeys, just love this particular combination of this mushroom dish. And there are many, in fact, I was just doing a demonstration yesterday, and I was doing one of the other mushroom dishes with coconut milk, which is also a forest dish. So these are things you discover by going into the forest and seeing what they're getting. They're getting, for example, they'll get the colocasia leaf, which is the arvi patta, which we all know, but we use it when it's big. But they get it from the forest when it's curled up still. And then they cut it up and they make a wonderful dish out of it, which we don't know about because we don't live in the forested areas. But you have to go there, and then you'll see the particular things that they eat there.
You know what I find absolutely fabulous about your books, and I think what makes them distinct from other books, is the culture and the history that you add to the recipes. It's not just a recipe. You're telling people about a way of life and about the culture around that. Mm-hmm. But Madhur, the big question, considering you are an actress mm-hmm. and you are the diva of cookbooks. If BBC told you, Madhur, we're going to give you some phenomenal amount and the time that you need to take mm-hmm. to travel around and they'll give you a project on food. Travel around and go and write this book on this particular aspect of food. And at the same time, you got an amazing, meaty role to act. Which one would you choose?
Well, it has actually happened to me. And the trouble was, it happened to me several years ago when I was offered a BBC series, which I was going to do, fabulous series. And a film came along with Morgan Freeman, and I was going to play opposite Morgan Freeman, and the role, they had met me, and they had enhanced the role just for me. And I think it was unenhanced after I couldn't do it. But I had already accepted the BBC. This is the trouble. If I hadn't accepted it, I would have taken the role with Morgan Freeman. But I had already accepted the BBC, and I couldn't let them down because they were all set up. We were ready to go in a week, and this thing came along, and it could have made that kind of difference in my life, but I couldn't do it. Couldn't do it.
Yeah. We're going to open it up. Does anyone have any questions for Madhur? Yes.
I do, please.
If you could just stand up so she can.
A short answer question and then a slightly longer one. What was the name of the editor at Random House that was so important to you?
The editor,
Yeah.
Judith Jones.
Judith Jones. Okay. And the longer question, people, my friends here who've become vegetarian, we were always asked, oh, is it because of animal rights or health or environment? Well, what's your reason for it? In India, where there's such a long tradition of what is the reason for it? Is it religious? Is it environmental? Is it health? What do you think is the main reason?
You know, I think that the reason for 90% of vegetarians is that their parents are vegetarian. So it's just the tradition in their particular family. It's not a decision, like Americans make a decision to be vegetarian. Indians generally do not make a decision to be vegetarian, though there are many young people who would say, I'm going to become vegetarian, just like they do here. I'm going to stop eating meat for various reasons. But a lot of them are, as it were, born into it, and they just keep up the tradition because that's what it is. And religion certainly has a part, health certainly plays a part, and certainly all these Ayurvedic thinking is tied to each thing that you eat. Something is good for this, something is heating, something is cooling. And even the act of cooking in the Ayurvedas is considered, chopping, cutting, are like the graces. So if you're doing all these things in a rhythmic kind of way, what you're doing is helping your soul move upwards. And I think it's all there. You don't always know it. And your grandmother doesn't always tell you. But it's somehow around in the house, all these ideas. They're floating in the air. And you, through osmosis of a certain sort, you inhale them. And you just become a part of it. I'm sure there's some thought given in some people's minds, but otherwise it's just inhaled and you become what your parents are.
Yes.
I had a question about flavor.
Yeah.
A lot of the food in India is about the flavor that you get. And it's an interaction between the ingredients that we use with the spices, as well as the cooking process, and perhaps even the equipment.
And also the chutneys that are around.
And the chutneys and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when you take a recipe, and you then say, I'm going to make this a global recipe, and you bring it, let's say, to the US, you find the flavors of some of the vegetables being so different, and frankly, the ingredients themselves being so different. Do you tailor what you do so that the taste at the end is the same as what you might get in an Andhra in a village? Or is this in fact an interpretation of what you find here with sort of similar ingredients? So is it, so in a sense...
Well, I think Jacques Pepin just apparently very recently said that anything you cook one day is not going to be the same the next day. Because the hand changes a little. You put a little more of this, a little more of that. The vegetable may have a different taste. The dal may be older. So you yourself can never reproduce exactly the same dish every day because you're human. And I think what happens is that to a certain extent, let's say I have a recipe in Hyderabad and I then come and try and make it here and put it in this book. I will try my best for her children. That is why in the Ayurvedas, again, they say eat local things, eat if your mother cooks for you, because she's done all the chopping and cutting, and all the love goes through all these stages and then goes into you, and I believe that. It is absolutely, I believe it. It's not a thing you can quantify in any way, but I think it makes a difference. If there's hate when you're cooking, you're not going to pass along anything good, I think.
Mana?
Madhav, you were married to a Muslim for a while.
Yeah.
I'd like you to comment on something that you said in the introduction. you talked about the Hindu thali being quote unquote pure and being served, and the notion of jhuta versus the Muslim who eats as a family with a common plate.
Right.
Any comments?
No,
So
no
is that
comments. I mean, it's
unconditional?
absolutely true. But the whole concept, that's why Nepal said that he thought India was a second-rate country. Remember one year he wrote that all of India was very angry
Yes.
in one of his books, Area of Darkness, I think it was. And his whole theory was that there's no brotherliness in amongst Hindus. It is amongst Muslims. Muslims are brothers. Hindus are individuals. Each one is getting his own soul to heaven. He is not concerned about the next guy. His own house has to be clean, so he sweeps out into the street like this. And his whole thinking is, I must do all the things that will get me up there. He's not bringing along his brother. So there are two very different philosophies at work. I won't say if any is better than the other, but they are different. And Parsis help. We are from the north and never know much about the south in my family. We are from the north. So he married a girl from Mangalore. And so I was dying to go because I thought, oh, the banquet will be fabulous. It's just going to be absolutely wonderful. And I couldn't go, so I asked my brother afterwards. I said, so tell me, what did they serve, the girl's side? What did they serve in the banquet? He said, all that coconut stuff. So he just dismissed it in one thing, all that coconut stuff. To him, the South is all that coconut stuff. So there are actually much subtler differences. For example, Kashmir, where I love the food. There's Kashmiri Hindu food and there's Kashmiri Muslim food, and they're different. The Hindus will use asafoetida, which is hing. The Muslims will use garlic. They will never touch hing. So these are two major things. And if they make the same saag, which is, you will know, Karanka saag or different names, Haak is another name. One group will make it with asafoetida, another group will make it with garlic. So within the same state, Hindus and Muslims will be cooking differently. They make their own masalas, which they dry or keep in various forms. In Kashmir, Hindus make a masala, Muslims make a masala, and they are both absolutely delicious, but they're not the same. They're slightly different. So there are these kind of differences. Then, to me, the smell in a Kerala kitchen, if I go in, I can smell it immediately. Mike, are you okay?
It's an emergency. I just
Okay.
have to call. I'm sorry.
Okay. So the smell is coconut. There's that tamarind, the fish tamarind they call it. There is roasted coriander and black pepper and red chilies and fenugreek, which is roasted and ground. So that smell to me is Kerala, absolutely Kerala. And so each state tends to, I think in Kashmir it's more mustard oil, a lot of fish is eaten that is got from the lake. So there are different tastes and different smells in each state, which are wonderful to pursue. Again, Orissa and Bengal would have the smell of mustard oil. That would be, and a lot of fish eaten along the coast. And again, it's very interesting that Bengalis will not eat sea fish. It's estuary fish or river fish. And the same is true in Bali, where it is always estuary fish or inland fish. And people have begun to suspect that there's a connection, that some of the people who went out to Bali may have come from the Calcutta region, and they have carried this whole idea, which must come from losing caste by traveling the 7 seas. I think that must have been the fear, or the fear of typhoons. I don't know what it was, but it exists in both places, which is quite interesting. So does that sort of address vaguely?
Oh, okay, Lavina.
Madhur, I was wondering, I mean, you've written so much about vegetarian cooking and for so many years. When you did this book, was there something new or something really surprising that you didn't know and you learned this time?
There's always something, but I can't say it was earth-shatteringly new, but it was new. My whole exposure to food in Coorg was new. My whole exposure to, for example, in Andhra, going to a little village on an island was new, just off Rajamundry in the Godavari River, this little island. It was just interesting. You saw versions of things that you had not seen before, and the whole chili gathering and the whole chili markets and how it's sold. The commercial aspect of growing chilies was something I didn't know about, but I found it exceedingly interesting.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a reception out there, wine, some vegetarian food, pakoras and samosas, and there are books here for sale, and Madhur will sign them. Thank you very much, and thank you, Madhur. Thank you.